Welcome everyone to our latest episode of Polyglot Nation, our series exploring all the different linguistic communities in South Africa. Today, we have someone from the Greek community, Yianna, and I'm very, very pleased that Yianna. I mentioned to a number of different groups that I was looking for someone who could talk about the experience of being Greek in South Africa and speaking Greek in South Africa. And Yianna very kindly volunteered to tell us about her life and how that reflects the lives of a lot of Greeks. So thank you very much for coming on, Yianna. Perhaps you could introduce yourself. Give us a bit of background about yourself for the audience's benefit.
Sure. So my name is Yianna. My full name is Yianna, but as we live in South Africa, it's not the easiest name to pronounce. So I always go by Yianna, which is not that much easier either. But I was born in Johannesburg, and my mom is a Cypriot South African, and my dad is a Greek South African. And yeah, my grandparents on my dad's side were actually born in Greece. And then my grandparents from my mom's side, my grandfather was born in Cyprus and my gran was born here. She is also Cypriot as well. So definitely half on both sides. Yeah, and I study genetics. So I work for a biotech company in a genetics firm at the moment. So we do stem cell banking. We do a whole bunch of genetic tests and all of that. So I really didn't go into the whole Greek linguistic side of things, but yeah, I'd be happy to talk you through it and how I've seen the Greek community growing up in South Africa.
Yeah, very cool. So I think maybe a few commentaries on that, comments on that already. In South Africa, and this is, I think, something that benefit to the South African audience and the international audience watching this. When we use the term Greek, we have a very broad sense of that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong there, but in general, when we say
Yeah,
Greek, we actually mean people from Greece in the sense of
Greek,
mainland Greece, but we can also mean
great.
South Africans of Cypriot origin as well. So it's actually it's much
Correct.
more of a catch-all term.
Yes, 100%.
And so I think maybe some of the other questions I have is you mentioned that before we got onto this interview that you went to Saheti.
Yes.
I am correct in saying that. Could you
Yes,
explain
yes.
for the audience what Saheti is?
Yes, so it is a Greek school in South Africa. It stands for, I'm probably going to butcher it now and then they're all going to come after me, but it's the South African Hellenic Education and Tertiary Institute. And we never really go by the full name, so that's why I don't even remember what it is. But it is a Greek school, it's a Hellenic school. And yeah, they really just focus on, I mean, it's standard IEB syllabus like normal South African schools, but it also includes the Greek lesson in that syllabus. And we do a whole bunch of Greek cultural events. We really do delve into the sort of Greek history of everything. We have Greek Independence Day, yeah, Greek dancing classes, that sort of thing. So it really encompasses the whole Greek background, which is great.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah,
very impressive there's, as a school they've maintained the discipline of teaching
100.
Greek, which is really
Yeah,
impressive.
yeah.
Which is I think that's very cool. I think that's a
I
great
think
initiative.
Greeks overseas, when they see it, Greeks overseas are always really like profoundly impressed by the fact that there's a big enough community here to actually have a school that caters for
Yeah. And of course I think
people.
so if you think about it, so I mean the Greek community is one of the largest immigrant communities in Johannesburg. It's definitely up there in the most, and if
Right.
not the largest, certainly among the most prominent. Like if you think about
Mhm.
immigrant communities in Joburg, the Greeks come to mind. Maybe together with when you think of the
100%.
Portuguese, the Germans, the Italians, etc. So excellent.
Yes,
So
yes.
then, and then I think the other thing that we could mention is that you belong to, and this is how we got in contact, you belong to the Greek Youth Society of South Africa. Now, I had
Yes.
no idea, by the way, that Saheti was an acronym. I actually thought it was
a
something in
thing.
Greek, but I didn't know. So the youth society in the Greek Youth Society in South Africa, what is its name? Because I actually can't figure. I mean, I can read it, but I don't know how it would be pronounced or what it means.
Oh, how did yeah. So it's called Nasosa, and it's a student association that sort of runs through universities. That's kind of where I picked it up from, and I became a part of it through university. And they sort of hold events. I was never part of the committee or anything like that, but yeah, they have some events for Greeks, and they often open it up, as you said, to some of the other communities, Portuguese communities. Sometimes they hold events together, Italian communities with the other associations from those communities. And yeah, and they have some fundraisers, and they do get-togethers on cultural days and things like that. So it really was for me after school. It was the one way for me to actually still be involved in the Greek community and see a lot of the same friends that I maybe grew up with, or meet new Greeks that I wasn't aware of, being at school. So yeah, they even came to speak to us while I was at school, and sort of introduced themselves and mentioned that we could be a part of it when we left school. So yeah, it was just sort of right up my alley. So that's why I
Awesome.
joined.
No, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah, I think again, it's an excellent initiative to keep people in contact, and
Yeah.
life is often determined by the networks that you can establish, and um, the Greek community, the Italian community, the Portuguese community, they tend to be very closely knit,
Look,
and
yes,
that
yes.
brings a lot of advantages. Um, well, perhaps now talking about your school days, my first question is how and when did you start learning Greek? I assume it was at Saheti.
At school, I would even say actually before that. So it was pretty much the first language I learned to speak when I was learning to speak. So my parents
Wow.
would speak. I mean, we don't. The funny thing is that we don't actually speak Greek now to each other, but sort of growing, learning my first words, they would have been Greek words. And then I actually had to learn English when I went to school. So yeah, that was the difference. But yeah, I'd say learning it properly would have started in pre-primary, and then really progressing as I went on with school. So I'd say, yeah, school would have been the main reason and the main way to learn Greek.
So you
Yeah,
went to Greek school to learn English, right?
exactly.
Not, it's a very South African story, if there ever was one.
Literally.
Um, cool. So so obviously Greek was something in I think in a sense Greek, the Greek language was something that you grew up with. You perhaps never really thought of it consciously, but can you would you say that there was ever a very strong interior personal motive to learn the language?
I would say that sort of came a little bit later
Okay.
in life. So I'd say now, even, or sort of more towards leaving school, varsity days, I think not so much learning, but rather maintaining the language. I think
Interesting.
there was more of an interior motivation for that when I left school, because obviously being so exposed to it at school, as you say, you don't really consciously think about it. It's not something that I went out of my way to really learn outside of school, anything like that, because it was a basic thing that I already knew how to speak. And plus, my grandparents from my dad's side don't really speak English, or they pretend not to, so that I have to speak Greek to them. So yeah, it was always something I was exposed to. So there was never really a conscious decision to learn it, but I think there was more of a conscious decision to maintain it when I left school. And to just, because obviously you're not using it every day at that point, whereas at school I had lessons every day for it for an hour. And you'd be speaking to Greek teachers, and in class you had to speak Greek and everything. So yeah, I think leaving was when I was like, okay, I'm not using this so much. And it unfortunately, the reality of it is, when you're not using it so much and not practicing it so much, you do tend to lose some of your vocab, and it deteriorates a little bit. So I think yeah, there was more of a conscious effort to try and maintain that after school.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think that sort of tracks a lot with a theme that's come up over and over again in this series that we've had on all the different linguistic communities of South Africa. The linked identity is very strong, and
Right.
you in a sense, if you've grown up so sort of ensconced within that Greek community, you don't really have to think that much about your identity. But suddenly, when you perhaps leave school and you go to university, you realize not everyone is as
It's the
Greek
same.
as you're used to, and sort of that leads you to question, well, what does it really mean being Greek in this context? And that I think is
Yes,
it's so interesting that always language and identity are so linked, and then the motivation,
intertwined.
as in your
Mm.
case, the motivation to maintain a high standard of speaking Greek, but with many others, the motivation to learn Portuguese or learn Italian, those come predominantly from this kind of internal desire to kind of very clearly establish who you are within a multilingual or and a multi-ethnic context, right?
Yes, yes. No, I think definitely once I left school was really when I started to realize, as you say, I wasn't surrounded by Greeks at all, actually, in varsity. I was really the only person from my grade that studied in my direction. A lot of other people went in a different route. So I think that was the first time that I was actually exposed to different cultures and actually like immersed in different communities. I became friends with non-Greeks, and so it was really something that I started to realize that I was really holding on to my Greek as part of my identity and as part of a way to actually sort of solidify that identity within myself and the fact that I was Greek and I came from a Greek school and I grew up that way. So yeah, I think I tried to hold on to that quite a bit when I went into varsity.
Very cool. So maybe now dealing with some of the more technical, detailed aspects of Greek. So I unfortunately don't speak any Greek. The Greek that I've been exposed to is the sort of Greek you pick up if you if you try read Plato, right?
Right,
And
right.
actually,
Okay.
although I'm I'm quite surprised by how much of that has remained in modern Greek. Um,
Yes. Yes.
so I was watching an interesting video a while ago about it was a documentary on feta on the process of making feta. Um,
Yeah.
and of course the interview was being held in the documentary is being held was entirely in Greek, and so but you can pick up a few interesting words that remain, right? You
Right.
know, so techne for
Yes.
the
Yes.
skill of doing something, etc. Um, so so unfortunately, I can't really speak very much about the details of Greek, but fortunately, I have you for that. So, uh,
Yeah.
were there any, I mean, in the process of learning Greek, what was the most difficult part for you?
So I think what I found quite challenging with Greek was the fact that you have to have a little bit of foresight when you start a sentence,
Mhm.
because you have to generate that sentence around the object that has a gender. So all
Okay.
of the words that refer to that object have to be in that gender. So that includes the article, that includes the verb, and they all of those have to then be gendered according to the object in that sentence.
Yeah.
And sometimes the object is at the end of the sentence. So your whole sentence before you say it has to be according to that object and the gender of that object. So I think what I found difficult was having that forethought to know what I needed to say and how, in what gender I needed to say it, and then not over practice it before I actually said it out loud, because it never came out the same way when you're actually saying it out loud.
Hmm.
So I think I really struggled with that. And I also, I mean, there's different verb tenses, there's
Yeah.
simple and continuous. So instead of saying just to write or I was writing, you would say I wrote, and then those two verbs would be completely different. They have different spelling. So knowing when to use those verbs in a context and in a conversation was something that I found quite challenging, because English isn't really like that. You don't have to really have a lot of forethought about gender of an object. Or yeah,
Yeah.
I would say that was the most challenging.
Interesting. Yeah. So, because of course, well, maybe then my question is, does Greek have a fixed word order as English does, or is it more flexible?
No, it's more, I would say it's more flexible.
Okay. Right.
But yeah, it's more just the fact that everything has to match up to the the gender of the noun that you're referring to. But I wouldn't say that the order is as specific as yeah, something like English, or as specific as something like Afrikaans, where you used to learn the rules of where everything used to sit.
Yeah,
So
exactly. So
yeah,
the reason I ask this, of course, is you know, in Latin, the in Latin word order is basically meaningless, right? Because all the words have different like case endings, and so you could
yeah, yeah.
you could put the words
Put
in
it
any order
anywhere.
they want. Exactly. And so it's
Yeah,
interesting to me that the Greek then that modern Greek conserves that, because it's definitely the case in ancient Greek, um,
yeah, yes.
various forms of
And
ancient.
I mean, what's actually, I know you mentioned that it was interesting that some of the stuff that you read in Plato has sort of been retained. And it's actually interesting to me as well, because I would say that, I mean, we never learned ancient Greek at school, obviously, but it does inform a lot of the current language, the modern language. And, you know, even some of our church services do still have some really old Greek words in them. I mean, we did a lot of history at like Greek history and mythology at school. And so a lot of that had yeah, a lot of influence from ancient Greek, and still some of the letters are slightly different. You'd see that in the icons at church. Yeah, some of that still is retained, which is
Yeah.
quite interesting.
Unfortunately, every time you say something, there are like 4 or 5 questions that come to mind that I really need to ask. So I have to kind of prioritize them on my side. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, from what you've said, so then the interesting thing is, well, I suppose actually as a science student, your Greek helped you a bit with understanding
yes, yes.
terms, right?
Yeah.
Mitochondria,
Yeah, and every time
etc.
I was at varsity, they would say, "Are there any Greeks here?" I'd be the only one that put up my hand, and then they'd sort of say, "Oh, well, then you know what this word means."
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And it's yeah, it helps enormously with etymology, with
yes,
understanding
yes.
why things are called
Called.
what they are.
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly.
yes, I think I've spoken to many people who took medical degrees and took degrees in the sciences, and they said that if they came into those degrees with a concrete, not expert, but a concrete knowledge of Greek and Latin, the job would have been
Would have
really
helped.
much easier.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be
Yeah.
nearly half the memorization that
Yes.
they had to do.
Yeah.
And if you can eliminate that memorization, things can be it can help you a lot.
Body. Yeah. Yeah. For
Yeah,
sure.
so that
For
must have
sure.
been kind of cool. And then in terms of church services, do most Greek Orthodox churches have the service that have the liturgy in the vernacular, or is it a form of ancient Greek like Koine or Attic Greek?
Oh, so I'm not an expert. I'm actually not too sure. It's definitely much older Greek than I was taught at school. I do
Okay.
struggle with it a little bit. I don't know if that's just to do with my vocab though, or if it's just that it is slightly older liturgies, older Greek. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but it is something that I do struggle with a little bit when I do go to Greek's liturgies. But the thing is that they have actually started in the last couple of years. I've noticed a lot more English sermons creeping in, and they do try to include a lot more, make it more accessible to people and to the youth, I guess, as well. So yeah, there's been a lot more inclusion of English in the services,
Okay.
which is great, because it's
That's very
difficult to
interesting.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah, that is I find that really interesting. In the West, of course, the since 1962, the tendency is for all the services to be in the vernacular. But before then, of course, it was Latin.
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
kind of and one of the interesting things is if you ever read the older text, the Latin is very nice and simple. It's actually quite good Latin for anyone who's trying to learn the language. Very,
Okay.
very simple. So that's kind of it's kind of interesting. I think as you were giving your answer, I think I recall hearing from somewhere that the Greek used in most Orthodox services is Byzantine Greek. So I think
Yeah.
it's not classical, it's not
Yeah.
ancient Greek, but it's
Yes.
kind
Yes.
of maybe
Older.
medieval Greek, right?
Yes. 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 That's a good way to describe it, I would say. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so then maybe if we can so you've spoken about how often you use Greek in the context in which you use Greek, so that's mostly family. Um,
Mm.
do you find yourself speaking Greek with Greek friends? Is it that sort of
Yeah,
dynamic?
yeah. So I have a couple of friends that live in Greece, and I do try and speak to them. But also, it's this like push and pull between them wanting to practice their English with me and me wanting to
Yeah.
practice my Greek with them. So sometimes we just end up speaking English, but yeah, I do try and speak to them. And then I also have a couple of Greek friends that grew up with very Greek parents, and I find myself using phrases with them more than I do with maybe some other friends of mine or some other Greek friends that maybe didn't grow up with as Greek parents. So yeah, I feel like I throw in a lot more Greek phrases when I speak to some of my Greek friends.
Cool.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part about the Greek language? What's the part that like you really, really like?
I think it's the how expressive it is. You can just
Okay.
make a sound and everyone just knows what you mean. And the hands. I mean, I know that's probably like a stereotype, but I do use my hands a lot. And I just think, yeah, just the you can just make a sigh and there's so much meaning behind it. And it sounds weird because how can you sigh in Greek? But like there is a way. It has its
Awesome.
own inflection and everything. So I think it's just super, super expressive. And it just I think even your face tends to be way more expressive when you speak in Greek. I don't know how, I don't know why, I don't know what it is, but it's yeah, I think it's just a very expressive language, which I really like.
Awesome. Favorite Greek phrase? Favorite Greek word?
Oh, you got me on the spot now. Favorite Greek phrase would probably have to be um, when you're referring to somebody that's like gluttonous, that eats a lot, is really
Mhm.
greedy or something like that. You call them a fagana.
Oh,
And I
interesting.
always, yeah, I love that because it's very like descriptive. And yeah, I use that a lot actually to describe
Afagana.
myself even.
Afagana. So is that the feminine or the masculine form? Because I assume that's an adjective, right?
So it is an adjective, but it's sort of one of those that doesn't change. So there's
Oh,
always those
Afagana.
exceptions that, yeah, in that case, it doesn't change according to who you're referring to, as far as I know. But yeah, that's also something that was super difficult. Is there's so many exceptions that maybe don't change, or something that sounds like it should. It ends in an A, so technically that should be feminine, but sometimes the article is not the feminine version of the article. There's
Okay.
yeah, there's a lot, but it's a really
So
really
what?
interesting language to learn.
Yeah. So what is the typical masculine ending for an adjective?
So it would be OS or
Os.
O,
Os. Okay.
yeah,
Or
and
os.
then
Okay. So
the yeah, or,
very
yeah,
much like the Romance languages.
yes,
So
yes,
that's kind of
yeah,
interesting.
exactly,
And
yeah.
so then, but then in terms of that, maybe I'll test my understanding of Greek there. Afagata was the expression.
Pagana.
Afagana. Thank you.
Close,
Afagana.
close.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Afagana is, I assume that's spelled Aphagana.
So it's just with a P. So I mean with an
Oh,
F.
okay.
So it's Fagana essentially.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then of course that Fag, or in older Greek Phag or spelling, that means that's to do with eating, right? So
Yes,
the
yes,
audience would be
exactly.
interested that an ichthyophage is someone who eats fish, right? Or
Yes.
I'm trying to think of another good example, another word in English that we have that uses that.
Where it has we have okay, this is my science background coming out, but
Cool.
it's the autophagy where it would eat where some a cell would get eaten by something else. So yeah, that would be an autophage
And maybe
and the cell dies.
a rather maybe unpleasant one would be uh, anthropophagy, right? The practice of eating humans. Um,
Exactly.
so,
Exactly.
so even
Yep.
in the one word that you've given us, we've been able to find so many different links that actually remain in modern
In
English. I
English.
love
Mhm.
there was the statement. I think it may have been Margaret Thatcher who actually said this, but she said when you learn Latin, uh, it's about 65% learning English, and the remainder learning a different language. And it's actually the same with both Greek and in fact, really, when you learn a foreign language, a lot of the process is just learning the language you already speak and understanding its own structure so that you can like relate what you're learning to what you already know. Um,
Exactly.
but it's especially the
Exactly.
case with Greek and Latin because we have so many words that derive from those two languages.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
And then can you think of a phrase in Greek that you'd like to share with us?
Every phrase has just evaded my mind.
How it works under
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying
community.
to
Yeah.
think. Um, okay. Well, it'll come to me. We'll come
Yeah,
around to
well,
it.
later on, yeah. If the moment you remember it, you can just raise your hand and
Sure,
we'll do
sure,
it. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
because yeah, being it's like I find if someone's watching you whenever you type
Yes,
normally you can type quickly, but the moment someone's
yes. Oh,
watching
yes, yes.
your capacity like
100%.
drops 70% at
Exactly.
least.
So
Yeah.
I'll think of something.
No, cool. So, can you share any experiences in which your knowledge of Greek has helped you participate more in Greek culture?
Yeah, I would say that would be definitely my school days as well. We did a lot of, as I said, cultural events. So we'd have Greek Independence Day, and my knowledge of Greek and the ability to speak Greek would also allow me to actually participate in those events and do speeches and do poems and participate in the marches and that sort of thing. So I think that helped me quite a bit because you really had to um, know the language quite well to say the speeches or the poems that were required of you on the day. So if I remember correctly, we even used to have like auditions and things like that. So it was quite a process. But then I think also the knowledge, knowing or having the knowledge of um, Greek, I guess, would be. I've also been involved in Greek dancing, even outside of school. So we
Cool.
used to have it at school as a lesson. It was literally you were marked for it and everything. But outside of school, I've also joined a Greek dancing group, which we attend practices. They've got a couple of practices per week. I go to the one for the sort of older group of adults, but yeah, I think that has helped me quite a bit because yeah, there's also words that they sort of mention, which for instance, a turn is called a volta, and then at least, oh, okay, they're saying turn, so I've got a turn now. So I think that's helped quite a bit as well with my Greek dancing.
That's so cool. Yeah, Greek dancing. That's amazing. So,
Yeah, yeah.
no, that's super super cool. Do you ever perform at Greek events?
Yes, yeah, we do
Nice.
actually. So whenever there's like a church fete, or like just some sort of religious event, they do bring the group in, and then we do dances, and we do the whole full costumes, head dresses, headpieces, all of that. So we do all of that, and I've actually even attended the one year they had a convention for some sort of there was a gala evening essentially, and it was Greek themed, and so they actually brought in us to dance. They brought in the group to do some Greek dances and get the audience involved and all of that. So yeah, I do participate quite a bit. I love it. So yeah, try to participate as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. That's very very cool. What is there like a particular term in Greek for Greek dancing? Is it a? I'm thinking like I know that the in Portuguese they often call the Portuguese dancing a rancho. Um,
Oh, okay,
and
okay.
and then I think about also so a lot of my family members and I we do flamenco,
Oh, yes,
Spanish dancing.
yes.
So is there like a particular term for Greek dancing? What is it in Greek?
So it's just a direct translation. So it's Elliniko Choro, which is just Greek dancing.
Okay.
But I'd say that what you're probably thinking of for like a term is the like famous Greek zorba, the
Yes.
zorba, which
Yeah.
everyone does. So yeah, that's sort of the Greek dance that everyone knows about. It's just the step kick sort of dance.
And
Yeah, people
and
love that one. They always get involved.
and does that feature in every Greek wedding?
Yes, it does.
Okay, good.
Absolutely.
Important.
And
Good. I'm
the
glad to
funny
hear
thing is
that.
that it's not that simple. We just make it simple so everyone can join, but there's so many variations, and
Yeah.
that's why I've really enjoyed my Greek dancing classes because it showed you the actual intricacies of the dance and the different variations that you can get. And yeah, it's pretty advanced actually. So I really enjoyed for that sort of challenge that it gives me,
No,
which is
I'm
really
very
cool.
glad. I'm very glad to hear that that kind of that there's so much interest that actually can generate and
Yeah,
sustain a Greek dancing community. I assume
group.
that the classes
Yeah.
are reasonably sized.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes, I mean, it obviously varies depending on the weather. Some people don't come when it's cold because they're late at night and stuff, but we do have quite big groups. Sometimes we have to split into two because you dance in a circle. And then sometimes we have to split into two because the room isn't big enough for the amount of people in that circle. So there's a really, really great uptake with it. And I mean, as I said, there's different classes as well. So there's enough time for, yeah, and there's enough people for multiple classes per week. So it's really, really amazing.
No, that's great. That's actually that's excellent news. I'm very glad to hear that there's that kind of that focus, that intent to preserve and pass on something
Yeah,
that
yeah.
important. I often ask people what their how they feel, um, what they think the future of their particular language is in the context of South Africa. I don't think that's particularly relevant here because it's actually got quite, even though the Greek
Deeply.
community is smaller than the Italian and the Portuguese community, if I'm not mistaken, there's quite strong there are quite strong institutions that are ensuring that it's going to be
That it's
passed on.
maintained for
Um,
sure.
and
So,
so then maybe what I can then ask instead of that is, do you perceive a difference in the way different generations think about being Greek and think about speaking the Greek language? The context I have for this is that what I've noticed and have spoken about beforehand is that very often it's the youngest generation, sort of our generation, that has the strongest interest in learning the language that their grandparents spoke. Do you think
mm,
that that's the case in within the Greek community as much?
I do. I think there's as you say, I think with the younger generation, there's a lot more of a want to learn it and maintain it because their grandparents spoke it. And then, I mean, a lot of people might have not had the opportunity to go to a Greek school like I did. So I have seen quite a few people wanting to learn Greek if they didn't learn it at school. And I also think though that there might not be as much emphasis though with being Greek and knowing the language. I've noticed a bit of a disconnect with that. I know that, for me, when I was growing up, it was sort of you're Greek, so you have to know the language.
Yeah.
But I think now it's more about the maintaining the culture and maintaining the traditions. And yes, knowing the language is fantastic and can help a lot. But I think it's more about it. There's been a lot more of an emphasis, in my opinion, on yeah, just the culture itself and immersing yourself in the culture and the traditions and maintaining that. So yeah, I think there's two sides to that. I'd say yes, there's quite more of a want to learn the language, but yeah, I think some people are also, or the community is maybe just a lot more content with actually maintaining the community itself, really.
Nice.
So yeah.
Cool. So then some parting questions. Favorite Greek food? Favorite Greek dish?
Favorite Greek food, probably like a different version of lasagna. We call it pasticcio, and it's sort of the same concept, like a bechamel sauce and pasta and mince and all of that. I love that. My grandmother makes it so well, and anything with pasta, I'm good with. So maybe I should have been a little bit more Italian, but yeah, I love pasticcio. And then I remembered a phrase that I could tell you.
Oh, awesome. Please go
So
ahead.
it actually reminded me when you asked me if I do any events. So when you say that, like when I mentioned church fates, the word is actually panegyri in Greek. And
Oh,
if
interesting.
yeah,
Okay, yes.
if you then say um in a panegyria dha, it means like it's sort of like a tongue-in-cheek way of saying that everything is just going to hell here. Everything is just
Okay.
it's a nightmare, it's chaos, like yeah, everything is just crazy. So ehigini panegyria dha is essentially that. So
Cool.
that's one of my favorites. My grandmother refers to that all the time when my grandfather's sort of moving around the house, messing things up, opening gates, closing gates, letting dogs out, that sort of thing. So I love that phrase.
Cool. And of course we have this word panegyric, right? Which is sort of an oration delivered in praise of someone. So
Okay,
another
okay.
word that we have in English that's come from Greek.
Exactly, exactly.
Um, Panegyri, like its etymology before we finish off, does that mean like everything is spinning? Gyro.
That's exactly what it
Okay,
means. Yeah, you pretty much
just wondering.
hit the
Yeah.
nail on the head there. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
think if anything, this has inspired me to try pick up Greek someday soon, because it would be as I said, beyond its utility, it's actually something I like the sound of the language a lot. It's
Okay,
very
okay. Yeah,
it's got an
yeah, yeah, yeah,
interesting kind of rhythm. Um,
for sure.
but with that, I'd like to thank you very much, Yianna, for your time. It's been super interesting. I'm so glad that we had you on, and I'm so grateful that that you were able to share your story with us, because it's been very informing and in a way eye-opening, actually.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to just talk about being Greek. Yeah, it's been a great chat. And yeah, I love what you're doing with the channel as well. Sharing different cultures with people. It's awesome. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you in Greek is
Ευχαριστώ.
"Afaristo."
Yes,
I hope I
yes,
said that right.
ευχαριστώ.
Okay, and then perhaps you could do us the favor. I'll say goodbye to everyone watching. Thank you very much for joining us. Yana, maybe you can sign off by saying goodbye in Greek.
Perfect. All right. Yes, us.
Goodbye.
Bye.